Hi, Doug, and welcome. Good to see you.
Hi, Nigel. You too. Good to be here.
I'll do an acknowledgement of country. I'm in Gumbaynggirr country in northeastern New South Wales. I understand you're in Perth, WA.
Yes, I'm on Whadjuk country, part of the Noongar Nation, here in Perth, next to the Swan River, the Derby.
I'll acknowledge the traditional owners and enduring custodians of those lands and these, and pay our mutual respects to their elders, past and present.
So, my respects to their elders across space and time. I think it's more reflective of the liminal nature of ancient wisdom.
Agreed. So we're getting together today, Doug, to talk about your life and your career as a psychotherapist, and to engage in a reflection on that journey that you've undertaken. And so very often, I like to start off at the very beginning of that journey, because there's always threads from the very beginning, and even life before you had life on this earth that sort of lead into how it is we become therapists and who it is we become as therapists. So can you start us off by talking about your beginnings, your family of origin, and where it all began for you?
Sure. Well, I was born here in Perth. Well, actually, in a suburb called Aberle, which was on the outskirts of Fremantle. Those of you who know that geography, Perth is the capital on the river, about 12 k's inland, and Fremantle is the port. And my family of origin came from Fremantle, and my dad, straight after the war, as many people did, built a house largely by his own hands in what was on what was a limestone dirt track, which is now a very major road in Aberle, and I think it was the first or second house. And I was taken home when I was born to what was called the TD, or temporary dwelling, which became the garage. And we lived in the garage for 18 months while Dad was still building the house. And that was very common in the early 50s in that area. A time of relief after the war, a time of scarcity of a lot of materials and things, and a time in which people responded to that with their own resource and ingenuity and kind of banded together. That was sort of the milieu that I grew up in. My father's father had served in saw him in the First World War as a stretcher bearer, and was a bit of a figure in East Fremantle. People would bring pets and kids with things wrong for him to have a look at, and he would get chop bones out of dogs' throats and that sort of stuff. And he was very focused on the sea, and had a shack on Garden Island, which is off the coast, and we would sail over there in his modified lifeboat to spend summer holidays. So that was, we would catch crayfish and fish, and so I learnt to do all of that as a kid. And that was kind of the focus. My adolescence, by this stage, the suburbs were developed, but the mentality in going to school was you were just basically sent to school. So I went to a state school called Melville High, which had a lot of really smart kids and kids from similar sorts of backgrounds, and that was a good experience for me, by and large, because I was really smart. I didn't have such a great experience in primary school because I was really bad at sport, bad hand-eye coordination. So cricket was dangerous, and I think I took my first mark in football when I was about 12, and I was looking the other way. They always put me in the back pocket where I couldn't do any damage, and there was a shout. I turned around, the ball hit me in the chest, and I caught it, and the whole game stopped and everyone clapped because I'd never done that. I promptly kicked it across goals and the opposition scored. So I didn't have a great history not being good at sport. But towards the end, like the end of primary school, the fact that I was pretty smart started to have some value, and that sort of followed me into high school. So, but I think of it really as an age of substantial innocence for the population at large, and certainly for me. So my adolescence was spent in the late 60s. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, 45s and LPs, and that kind of stuff. And I went straight from school to university, UWA, in 1971. I can still remember my student number. So it started with 71, which was the year. 711 27 9. I'm not sure why I still got that, but there we are. And I went straight through and did a 4-year electrical engineering degree with honours, and joined actually as a cadet, I joined the electricity supplier, because that gave work experience. And I only ever intended to work out my bond, which was 2 years. But they kept giving me really interesting things to do, and I wound up staying there for 39 years and 50 weeks in various jobs and forms and manifestations. With an engineering career, I also did a master's in engineering pretty well straight away in parallel with my work. I was fortunate enough to be working on a project in a power station that lent itself to the dissertation. So that's sort of a quick scoot through my career. I got married really early. One of the observations I was going to make was, back then we tended to work out what we were good at in school and then work out how to make money at it. So, I was good at maths and physics. I got a general exhibition, and so that meant engineering was an obvious thing to do. My mother was afraid I'd leave ugly appendicitis scars, so I discounted doing medicine, and because I wasn't very good with my hands. And I'm mentioning that because not a lot of thought went into it. It was kind of like, oh, well, this is the thing to do. And once I was doing it, I wanted to do well at it, because that's what I do. So I kind of went through with a lot of momentum from study and a lot of attachment to doing well. And that kind of carried me into the masters as well. Got married really young. I was 21. That was something else that happened a lot in those days. And my wife was a year younger than me, and so I'd just graduated and she was finishing university. She did a B Psych and a Dip Ed, became a school counsellor. But in her journey, of studying Psych at UWA, she befriended one of the other students who introduced me to Gestalt, which was quite a young discipline at the time, and they were bringing therapists across from over east to run workshops for trainees, but also they ran public workshops. And I did one and was just immediately fell in love with the philosophy. So I mention that now because that's an important part of the journey. So I did all the public workshops I could when they brought trainers in, and developed a real interest in Gestalt and the philosophy behind it. And about less than that, 4 or 5 years into the marriage, sought therapy for ourselves as a couple with the very first practicing Gestalt therapist in Perth, whose rooms many years later I purchased as a deceased estate, and we are sitting in them now, which was an interesting loop. But also I got interested in actually practicing, and of course I was working as an electrical maintenance engineer at the time in a power station, which I enjoyed. But there were people around, like Anglican Marriage and Family Counselling, who offered training at night for volunteers to be marriage counsellors, because there was a lot of that about. There was much less formal training, and a lot of people trained as volunteers. And so I took that up, and I was training with them at night while being an engineer during the day. And that actually worked really well for me. I made it through their 4-year training program. I think 16 of us were taken on, and 4 of us eventually survived to be certified as marriage counsellors under the auspices of that organisation. So I would, 2 nights a week on the way home, I would stop and see 2 or 3 or 4 couples. And that's how my interest and my capacity began to grow. And I kept an interest in Gestalt training with the visiting therapists. So that, from fairly early on, I basically had a parallel career. I was doing a lot of engineering and also had the counselling growing at night and on weekends. It was back in the days of weekend marathons and things like that. So I can remember doing that. My wife committed suicide halfway through the first year of the first training program set up specifically in Gestalt therapy here in WA, and that was momentous, of course, in many ways, and that meant, I by that stage had a cohort of fellow counsellors who sort of closed in around me, which was really a lovely experience. And in many ways, it kind of solidified my interest in therapy, without going into lots of detail, but we might look back to that. Rolling forward, I joined a group of Gestalt therapists who were bringing out trainers from overseas, from the US in particular, and a bloke called Bob Resnick, who had been running a major training program for a long time. In fact, only died in October of 2022, just short of the 50th anniversary of his European training school. But I attended a workshop with him, and he said, why don't you come and train with us in the European summer school? And I said, well, I don't have a mental health degree. And he said, well, we don't care. We'll train you. And that was a great opportunity, and I took it up in 1994. By that stage, I was running working in a large power station that I eventually ran at Muja, which is in the southwest, and I was living on a farm. And I went to this intensive workshop, 12 days, and I felt like I'd come home. I just felt like I'd found my people. And I went every second year for a while because it was quite expensive. And then from 2001, I basically had been every year. In 2002, they asked me to take their exam, which was a very comprehensive 4-hour written exam, and then an hour interview, and then a 40-minute live therapy session observed by 3 of the trainers. And if you got through all of those, you were certified. And so that's what I did, and certified in 2002. And they invited me onto their faculty in 2003 because I had an interest all the way along in how Gestalt applied to organisations, because I was working in one, I was dealing with a lot of union turmoil, a lot of transformation. And I found that the skills I was gaining at night and in that training applied just brilliantly to that circumstance. So I began to think and write a bit about how Gestalt applied to organisations, which of course it does, because organisations are just another organism. So that was all happening. And then from 2003 onwards, I attended every workshop until it was interrupted by COVID as a group leader, and I would run a theory track on Gestalt and organisations, as well as training clinicians. And through that time in my engineering career, I basically got more and more senior positions and wound up running a large power station, and then the transmission system, and then ultimately Western Power, which was a government trading enterprise, which I ran for 6 years. And all through that, I maintained a small practice of 3 or 4 people a week, which I'd see early in the morning or at night. and I continued to do training workshops and did the work in Europe every year. So that's kind of how I got to where I am now. I left that managing director role in 2012, and that gave me an opportunity then to just turn the dial up on both of the, like start harvesting both of the histories. And I was already doing a lot of individual coaching as well as straight psychotherapy, and worked with organizations. My tagline was, I help executives have hard conversations. And I both did strategic planning and also team, not so much team building, but team engagement work. And so I just stepped seamlessly into that space and have been working in there ever since, doing that. And probably about 30 to 40% of my practice is working with organizations. I've got quite a stable of CEOs or C-suite people that I coach, and also going in and working with executive teams, doing workshops that lift their capacity to engage, as well as supporting them to pull together strategic plans that are actually enactable, because I weave the therapeutic insights into that process as well. The other 60 odd percent time wise is individual psychotherapy clients, and a number of them include people who are training in the West Australian Gestalt Institute 4-year program, so they're required to do a number of sessions a year, and I also supervise graduates from that. And I still do a reasonable number of couples as well. And I additionally trained in a particular means of treating trauma using dynamic imagining of guided imagery, and so a percentage of my work is on that. I might draw a breath there because that was rather longer and more continuous than I expected.
Thanks, Doug. No, I think that's really lovely to have your your narrative of your story from the beginning through your education, your lack of ability in sport, but discovering intellectual ability, and then following a pathway of maths and science. That means that maths plus science equals engineering. All right, I'll become an engineer. Then you're an engineer, and you had a long career of 39 years. Well,
I'm still registered. I still provide engineering input to people as well from time to time, much more on the leadership level, but yeah.
And it was a gradual transition to psychotherapy, through marriage and family counselling, through Gestalt therapy, to opportunities that you said yes to now being a trainer and a supervisor for not only Gestalt in Perth and internationally, and you've got a mix of work that builds upon that original career and uses the connections from that individual from that previous career, but utilizes now your psychotherapy training and thinking and philosophy have all kind of come together in that space. So perhaps a question for to be asked is, well, who are there's kind of a key influences. So often in psychotherapy and counselling, we talk about the people that we've been influenced by, and Gestalt therapy sort of talks to some of that. Though in Gestalt therapy, there might be particular influences that might be more influential for you, and then also how you conceptualize your own practice. Like, what would be your philosophy of practice across the different organizations and client groups that you work with?
Yeah. Okay. One observation that I'll make just before going into that, as I was listening to you summarize it, is I've been reflecting for the last year or so on the concept of harvest. I was stimulated by a book I rather loved by a lapsed Catholic priest called John O'Donoghue. It's called Anam Cara, which is Celtic for soulmate. And it's one of those books that you can kind of open and read at any point. And he reflects on the circular nature of Celtic spirituality, and he reflects on the seasons. And his reflection on the season of harvest registered with me, because I do feel like I'm harvesting 50 years now of immersion in both of those worlds, with all of the things that I've learnt, and each of the backgrounds has informed the other very powerfully. So it feels like a very natural kind of evolving to me. And yeah, a couple of things. Harvest is about having spent a lot of time working, toiling, growing, nurturing. And I definitely have the sense of that. And then there's the sense of reaping the bounty, sort of bringing in the things that have been learned or grown. And then the joy of distributing it. And there's a lovely kind of sense of generosity about that. And I'm just very often conscious that I'm doing that. Often I'm working with someone that's a coaching client. I'm aware of how easily I can see what's happening or what's occurring, and engage with them around that from a place of knowledge and experience that immediately speaks to what they need. I can also dip all the way down into what's happening for them at a intrapsychic level that might be interfering, and that feels like a very lovely activity of harvest. So I just wanted to notice that in response to what you said. In terms of key influences, well, the very first Gestalt therapist I ever experienced was a bloke called James Oldham, who wrote a book with two other guys. Yarrow Starak, who was lecturing in Gestalt at UQ for many, many years, and Tony Keyes, who was a physicist. James was an MD, a surgeon. And they wrote this book called Risking Being Alive, which is a Gestalt primer that really spoke to people about the fundamental principles of awareness and self-responsibility and so on. And he came over to do a workshop organised by this friend of my wife. And that was where I felt like I'd just sort of come home. And the experience of the respect for me as the client, and the idea that all of the wisdom that I needed would come from within me rather than being imparted from outside, was really resonant, because I don't like to be coerced in any respect about anything. And it just felt lovely, and it was a lot of fun. He was great fun. We got on really well, and I thought, oh yeah, this is a great way to think and operate and be. So he was an early influence, and ironically, I can't remember how it came up, but in the course of the workshop, he said, oh, we could plot you a course to become the boss of that organisation that you're in. And I was a baby engineer at the time. And actually that happened. So that was really interesting. Another powerful influence was the man who used to own the office. It didn't look anything like this, but the space that I bought, his name was Ross Coleman, and he was the first sort of resident practicing Gestalt therapist in Perth. And I just learned a lot of the basic principles and a lot about myself working with him, both in couples therapy and individually. I remember sitting on my outside toilet in my first house at Leederville with the door open, looking at the garden and reflecting on a session I'd just done where he had confronted me very powerfully with the fact that I was afraid, and I was going, I'm not afraid. And I sat there thinking, yeah, actually I am. And I began to list all the things I was afraid of, and I thought, yes, I'm afraid, and I do it anyway. Which has been my favourite definition of courage. And I can remember the moment of that awareness very powerfully. So those are the little snippets of the early experience, and the liberation of being able to go, yeah, I'm scared, and it's not stopping me, was huge. and still sits with me today, actually. So that there are a couple of just sort of early fragments.
Influences, and also that interweaving of the personal with the professional, and how the personal experience and the personal growth and the experience of the practices, the experiences of the individual therapists that you had and trainers, as well as, you know, your own willingness to self-reflect, and the growth experience as being part of the journey of the therapist. So I'm wondering then, how has that all come together?
Well, let me just offer a couple more influences before we do that, because they were sort of in early. I'll come back to that. The next most powerful was probably Bob Resnick, the guy who invited me to the GATLA, which is Gestalt Associates Training Los Angeles, training program in Europe. He was a substantial figure in the Gestalt world. He was trained by Fritz Perls and Jim Simpkins, so he kind of had the direct line from the birth of Gestalt therapy. And he and another guy called Todd Burley, and Bob, along with his wife Rita, ran GATLA, and they were all powerful influences on me. Perhaps the most profound was Todd, who had a really lovely way of embodying, recognizing what is, standing in what is, and coming from there and accepting that. I remember him, we were in a clinical practicum at the European workshop, so people from all over the world, and he was leading it. And first day, nobody wanted to work, you know, I'm tired. And he said, we've all come a really long way and paid a lot of money. We could invest the next 2 weeks in trying to impress each other with how clever we are, or we could just show up as we are, see what we can learn, and go back as better therapists. So why don't we all make a pact right now to do our worst work in front of each other? And it was a tremendously liberating observation, and that kind of stuff is very typical of him. And you know, I often think of sayings that he had. So I was very fortunate to be influenced by those three. Bob also was a very powerful influence, and very good at focusing on what is and working purely. One of his sayings that often comes back is, you can't phone from Chicago if you're in New York, meaning it's pointless trying to be anything other than exactly what you are. And that I've always found that really liberating to come back to. So that GATLA organisation that I'm still a part of now, although all, but both Bob and Todd died and Rita is not at all well, we're actually, some of us are now actually grappling with keeping that legacy going in Europe. In fact, I'm in the midst of that as we speak. I spent most of Easter on that. But that they were profound influences, and I just want to acknowledge that. And it was very much about that and embodying. I might talk about that a bit later in terms of my operating philosophy, but that really came from those people and the many people I met through being at that international workshop every year with people from all over the place with diverse ways of embodying and living out Gestalt. And that was something that trio of Bob and Rita and Todd were really valuing of and wanting to encourage.
And precious. You really value that to the extent that you are now really searching hard for a way to people can experience that value as well. I think that's an important. You know, you talked about being at a particular part, this particular stage in your own journey, and that's sort of that's sort of part of where you're up to in that journey. And I think it's good for new people coming along to go, actually, this journey, it's a much longer journey than to do a course and become a counsellor and off you go. Actually, there's a life trajectory.
That's true. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because most of my learnings have come from working live in front of those people and doing things that I considered to be fuck-ups. And I found them excruciating. And they were just profound learnings. And so even today, I'm still leaning into difficult spaces, challenging spaces, because my conviction is that it's only by being scared and continuing to do it anyway that we hone our skills, our capacity. And I think I joked with you. When I die, I expect my therapeutic blade to be 1 molecule thick on the cutting edge, and that only happens by the activity. It is absolutely not an intellectual exercise. It is a living, embodying exercise, and that's what really appeals to me about Gestalt, because it recognises that profoundly, and it fills a large gap that, while I was simply operating as an engineer, was kind of gaping.
Thanks, Doug. I think you were then going to go on to consider, as you're sharpening your therapeutic blade to a molecule's width, how do you describe the what of it? And it's not easy to describe the what of it, but
yeah,
what is it that you're doing? What is, if you have a philosophy of practice, or if you have a conceptualization of what it is that you're doing and how it is that you do it, how do you put that into words?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. When I have a very short period of time, I think of it as what's the lift pitch? The business world people talk about what's your 2-minute lift pitch. If I have to summarize the essence of Gestalt in one sentence, and I can't remember whether this came from Bob, I think it might have, but anyway, it's this sentence: awareness is to dysfunction as sunlight is to mildew. That recognition is the absolute heart of Gestalt, and based on it is the idea that awareness, courageously focused awareness, will do its own work. It translates into the paradoxical theory of change, which says that any change that's forced will be undermined and undone. The only sustainable change comes from standing in what is and letting the next right thing emerge, which it always does sooner or later, and it takes massive courage when it's later. It's based on the German notion of Prägnanz, which says that every organism will move to the greatest state of health that its awareness and global constraints will allow. That is the heart of Gestalt, the faith that faithfully held awareness will support the movement to health. It doesn't need to be forced. It doesn't need to be cajoled, and in fact, it can't be. So if we think about sunlight and mildew, it's a lovely analogy, because if I have mildew in my shower, which I do, I can squirt it with some chlorine bleach, like BAM or Wallop or whatever it's called, and it will disappear, except for the bit in the grout, and it will be back again in a week. If I take a bathroom tile with mildew on it out and put it in the sun, what happens? And of course, it's a trick question, because the answer is nothing. Day one, even here in WA where it's 42, nothing. Leave it for a few days, it starts to dry out, flake, and basically be blown away in the wind. And if we leave it in the sun, it eventually is killed completely, disappears, never to return, whilesoever the sun is shining. And that is the power of the light of awareness. If I have the courage to shine my awareness exactly on what is happening for me in the moment, it will bring health. I don't need to force anything. I just need to gently and firmly keep the light shining. And so that is the work for me of Gestalt. And of course, there are a number of ways of supporting the illumination. And I could talk about those, but that is at the heart of it. I'm not going to make anything happen. And that's very important, because I have learned, thanks to one of my other mentors, to be very alert. His name's Zimbinski, very alert to when I become productive. The moment I can feel myself becoming productive in therapy, I stop. I'm trying to make something happen. I stop and notice that, bring my attention to that, often share that with the client, because once I start trying to make something happen, once I have an agenda of my own, I will have lost what the client needs. So the discipline of staying with the purity of that, focus, the constant observing, the constant benign curiosity about what is going on, whatever it is what opens out the client's awareness like a flower, and that in turn will support their movement.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. That was a very, very rich description of what it is that you're aiming to do. And I really love that connection with, as soon as I notice myself becoming productive, actually trying to produce something, trying to put something of myself into the process, I know that the moment is lost and I need to step out and return to awareness. One of my questions was, what are the presenting issues? But maybe if you take that framing of what it is that you're doing and that emphasis on awareness, what does that mean? What does that mean about what is presenting to you? Like, what is it that you find is being presented to you?
Right.
And how do you see that when you look at it through that frame?
Well, that's a good question, because that's how I keep myself really focused on what is happening right now. Bob Resnick always talked about fresh fish. How is whatever the person's process is out there in the world presenting itself here between us now? Because one of the other tenets of Gestalt is that awareness occurs at the contact boundary between me and other. It also occurs at the contact boundary between parts of myself. And so noticing the smallest shift, I was just working with someone who swallowed at a moment when he was about to say something, and he tends to get into long running narratives, and I stopped him and said, stop, what happened then? What happened when you swallowed? And he teared up, watching for those moments and catching them and holding them without doing anything other than just noticing that was really sad. That the powerful impact of that is constantly underestimated. That's enough. And so one way is just to be watching really closely, paying really close attention to what is happening for the whole person. And that was on Zoom. You can easily do it that way as well. It's not quite as good as being in the room, but I think that's the first thing. The other thing is noticing how I'm impacted by what they're saying, because there's a contact boundary between me and the client. So I'll often share that, like if I notice I'm becoming productive, as I said, I'll say that. I notice I'm having this impulse to try to fix things for you, and I'm suspicious of it, so I'm stopping. I remember one bloke who said, "Don't you have a magic wand?" I said, "No." I'm sure that's disappointing. Let's just sit in that for a minute. I don't. And you're feeling really stuck, and I get that. Stuck's awful. And that's enough often to unlock the next movement. So that observing what's been said, observing what's happening with the person's body, and simply being really present to that, to me, is the kind of highest and best. The other thing is noticing repeated patterns that they might report. "Oh, I noticed that you do this." I'll often draw on my experience and say, "Oh, when I start to do that, I'm aware that usually this is what's going on for me. Now, I don't know that that's happening for you, so check me." I often say that, check me carefully. But when that's happening, when I do that, this is happening for me. Does that make any sense to you? And very often they'll go, "Oh, yeah." So I'm answering your question about, well, what do I do that actually heightens that level of awareness? So that's another example. And I also will be very alert to when they appear to be having an internal tussle, which is often going on. And I share this image that I have of the Knights of the Round Table, which is, imagine a table coming out of my chest about here, and ranged around it are these parts of me that formed at particular moments when I needed protection. And they're stuck at the age they formed at. They're absolutely pure and incredibly brave and committed in looking after me. And I think of them as knights because they're committed to my well-being. And they sort of start off young here and get older as they go around the table. And it's infinitely expanded because I can find new ones every now and again. But I often offer that image to people and share a couple, like my youngest, formed within a couple of days of my birth, and he doesn't have any words, but I know exactly what he's thinking, and what he's saying is, we are on our own. There is nothing out there. There's no point looking out to the environment. There's nothing there. My mother couldn't feed me, and I can trace my fierce kind of individual lone wolf kind of natural focus back to that. And when I get into a really down place, he's inclined to get onto the table and direct traffic. And that's the very time that I need to reach out. So I've learnt to say to him, thank you. Thank you when you took care of me and I had no one else. You will always be welcome at this table. And now, we're not alone. Now we're legion. You can sit down. You are amongst friends. Don't go away and don't stop paying attention. You will always be needed. You are amongst friends. You can sit down. Thank you. And that way I have access to that which I value, only I'm not in bondage to it. And so it is with every other one of my knights, my fierce judge, the one who at the age of 7, I can recall the crystalline moment that he popped into being. He says, nothing you do will be of any value unless you have worked really hard. And I can remember exactly the moment and what my dad said and where I was. And he's been fabulous, because if you work really hard, you achieve lots of shit. Only he robs me of the things of the joy from the things that I can do effortlessly. So I over prepare for every workshop that I do. And I've learned to say to him something similar. Thank you. Thank you for all the times that you look after me. You'll always be welcome and needed at this table. And now, we're not alone. Now we're legion. You're amongst friends. You can sit down. Thank you. And the thanking is really important. And when I share that image with clients, I find that it really resonates with more than 90% of them. And the thanking is the important bit, because most people will be aware of one of those voices and they try to shut it down or get rid of it. And no, they're all there for very good reasons, and they're utterly pure in their motive, and you'll never get rid of them. Thank them, acknowledge them, sit them down, invite them to pay attention. That way, I can now start to introduce contact between the different parts of the self and give the person access to all of themselves in a way that isn't conflicted. So that's another awareness raising tool that I find really helpful, just as an example.
Yeah, lovely. And that also talks to that question around how you conceptualize your practice and what it is that you're working with and how you're working with it. The question that came to me was that whilst your focus is on awareness and contact and engaging with self and other in the moment, why are they coming? So you have people who are coming because they're executives who are wanting to have hard conversations, they're boards that are wanting to make strategic decisions and to increase their function, couples who are coming, individuals. You got people who are students, they're coming, ostensibly partly because they have to because they're students. But why are people coming to see? Why are people coming to see you as a therapist? What's driving them? Because it's not I just want to increase my awareness.
No, they usually present with something that they're unhappy about, or they present with a dysfunction in my language, which is my broad term for anything that's not working well or as well as you want. So I'm entirely process focused. I don't care what it is within fairly broad limits. So mostly they come because they are aware of they wouldn't use the word dysfunction, but a dissatisfaction, a point of pain, or a point of frustration, and they don't want to keep going like that. And I only say one thing when people come in. I just say, look, I only make one assumption about anyone who walks through that door, and that is that they want something, and it's not always what they need, only it's a very good place to start. So at some point, sooner rather than later, I'd like to hear what it is that you want. And that's usually the beginning. And there will be people who, and I'm thinking there's quite a range, there are people who feel there's people who feel anxious in some form or about something or in some way. People who feel frustrated. Couples often come in really angry with each other and struggling to find the nourishment they want in the relationship. Individuals fall into two categories. A lot of them come, a lot of corporate types come just by word of mouth and reputation. And often it'll be because of something that's happened at work that is a dysfunction, only it's actually driven by their internal process. And I'm in the unique position of being able to offer them coaching, which is looking at options that they have to function differently in the workplace, what to do. But I can also move seamlessly from that through to how are they stopping themselves from doing something? And that's another awareness question that I often use. If they articulate a frustration, whether it's a corporate or someone else, of wanting to do something and finding they can't, I usually go, in what way are you interrupting yourself from doing that? This or that's happening, but I persist until I get to the choice they're making to interrupt themselves on their journey towards the resolution of the need, which is the Gestalt contact curve. That's a very profound way of raising awareness. So I've been a corporate executive last week, because of some workshops that I'd run with this bunch of people who are trying to build a big plant and arguing with each other, putting it politely, because they never got their values aligned in the first place. He talked about his frustration with the other, and I would ask, how did you interrupt yourself from letting him know that? Oh, well, I imagine he would attack me. Okay, good. That's the interruption. What makes you think that would happen? And then can you imagine showing up with wanting to ask him and sharing your fear that he will attack you? And then that moves them into thinking, oh, that's this is phoning from Chicago instead of New York. I'm scared. So I'm going quickly, but that you can see how that kind of process would open out the awareness. And then once they've got that, they're able to make these little experiments at the boundary, which often turn out differently, and that's how things evolve. And that's pretty universal, regardless of what the presenting issue might be.
Yeah, there's a liberation in that. There's strong existential themes of freedom emerging from that Gestalt idea of the organism always, seeking towards its best level of functioning within the environment. So to finish up, you work with therapists in training, and so I'm curious about what your best advice would be for people who are probably, I guess, early in their career, or even still at the training level. What's your advice for somebody who's engaging on their own journey?
Follow your own journey, follow your own interest, and look, I have the 5 C's that I often share with corporates, or 2 lots of 5 C's actually on a slide. And there's the visionary or envisioning or empowering C's, which apply to everybody. And there's the fear-driven or constraining C's. And the empowering C's are curiosity, compassion, courage, calm, and connection. And if I wake up and tend to think about those words and think that's how I'm going to engage with the world today. I choose to be curious and compassionate. That combination is unbeatable. Courageous, being scared and doing it anyway. Calm and connected, leaning into connection rather than withdrawing. The opposite are criticism, coercion, cowardice, chaos, and constriction. And going into that place shrivels me up, takes me away, takes me out of contact. And there's at the bottom of that slide, I put your choice, because there is a choicefulness about how I choose to engage with the world. So one way of answering your question about advice is, the first thing to do and to stay on, because you never complete it, is your own journey. As I mentioned earlier, all of my learnings were from being in and doing and staying on that journey. They were not about stuff I read. And so do that. The way the milieu, the zeitgeist has shifted, everyone needs a degree. What I observe is that what is learnt in an intellectual environment doesn't support you much at all to be a really good therapist. That's a very long apprenticeship. It took me 10 years part-time, and then it's taken many, many more years. In fact, 42 to be precise, to get to where I am now, and I'm still learning, and it's leaning into my own journey, my own curiosity about what's happening for me, looking at it with compassion rather than judgment or coercion, and seeing what there is to notice, seeing what there is to learn, but being curious about what's not working here, and looking at that from a compassionate lens, finding people who will take you on and mentor you, and doing the apprenticeship of learning how to be a therapist, which is a long one, is the best way to get really good as a psychotherapist. And it's almost like the intellectual learning is hygiene. That's now needed. The real learning comes after that. And it is largely about being willing to pursue your own journey, because from a Gestalt point of view, we are the instrument of change. It is where the contact occurs, and if we're going to do that well, then we need to be constantly alert to our own process, constantly getting supervision, constantly reflecting on our own journey to be as open and clear and clean and available as we possibly can for the contact in the moment. That would be, that was a bit long-winded, but I just answered you in response. That would be my advice.
Yeah, good advice. Curiosity, compassion, courage, calm, and connected, and follow your own path. I think that's the same advice that I gave. And I feel like having this conversation with you, I certainly feel like I've been learning and I've been mentored, and much appreciate that. Hope other people watching this feel the same way. So just before we finish, any final words to wrap up? Anything that you wanted to say that you haven't said already?
No, I'm looking over to the right here at your list of questions that you put in the chat, and I was just scanning down to see. I think I've actually the answers to most of them have come up naturally in the conversation. So no, I don't think there's anything else to add. I'm actually in quite a actually started in quite a distracted state because of stuff I'm trying to organise with people on the other side of the world, and I was aware of feeling anxious about that, and I wondered about naming it, and I made a choice to bracket it, which is another Gestalt process of acknowledging what's there, looking it in the face, and choosing to bracket. And I did that, and as I think about how the conversations flowed, I'm feeling like that. I'm able to do that well. I feel satisfied, and I feel really appreciative of the opportunity. So thank you. I've really enjoyed it. It's back to that sense of harvest, actually. When you ask questions like that, there's an opportunity to kind of harvest the accumulated awareness and kind of share it in that bountiful way. And so I hope people have gained something from that, and I certainly feel really appreciative of the chance. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug Aberle.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate your time and your wisdom and your sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.